Hey you guys, welcome back to my Tomes of Terror book review series. So, Scott Smith, he's an author I've talked about on this series before. He's only published a couple of novels during his writing career. He also writes screenplays. Luckily for him, though, both of the ones that he's written are pretty fucking rad. So, if you remember, I read and reviewed his 2006 novel, The Ruins, not too long ago. He also wrote the screenplay for the movie for that, which came out in 2008, which is actually, quite decent. But as it happened, I had never read his debut novel, the 1993 sort of noir thriller, A Simple Plan. And look, I actually have the book this time. I know for a long time I've been reading ebooks on my Kindle Unlimited, so I haven't had a print book, but look, I actually have a print book this time. So there's that. Now, I did see, because probably most people know that in 1998, Sam Raimi directed a movie adaptation of this. And I had seen that movie, and I remember liking it very much, but it had been so long since I'd seen it that I had completely forgotten, most of the plot points. So I was just kind of well, I'll just go into the book, and, I don't really remember all that it's about. I just kind of, remembered the setup, and that was it. I didn't remember all the twists and turns. So I was so it won't be spoiled for me. So I got the idea to read the book, actually, mostly because of Jordaline Reeds, who is one of my favorite booktubers, as they call it. She reviews books, mostly horror, but she does kind of other stuff as well. And she fucking loves this book. And I was I really liked that movie, and I bet the book is pretty good too, because The Ruins was also fantastic. So I said, I'm just gonna bite the bullet, and I'm gonna buy a copy, and I'm gonna read that bitch. And holy shit, I mean, if this book is not one of the most tense, nail-biting, and really relentlessly grim things that I've ever read, then I don't know what the fuck anything is anymore. You know what I'm saying? It's excellent. I mean, I think this book, I liked The Ruins a lot, but I think I like this one better. I mean, this is just a smashing book. And this is one of those books that I don't think I've been this compelled to finish something for a really, really long time. I mean, some books it's just kind of ooh, I get really into them and stuff like that. But this one, I was just kind of I have to keep reading because I have to see what fucking crazy shit is happening next. Now, if you've seen the 1998 movie, which has a great fucking cast, by the way. Bill Paxton is in it, Billy Bob Thornton is in it, and Bridget Fonda. Know that the movie sticks pretty close to the book, at least up until the end. Now, Scott Smith also wrote the screenplay for the movie as well. Now, so the end of this, I will say that some of the things that happen are kind of the same at the end, but maybe some of the motivations or some of the characters are kind of switched around a little bit. It's essentially the same story, but I kind of like that Scott Smith, when he was writing the screenplay, stuck very close to the novel until the end, and he's well, if you read the book, I don't really necessarily want to do a slavish adaptation. I'm going to introduce a little bit of variation in it that doesn't really affect the theme of the story that much. I think the movie, they did soften it up a little bit, not that much, but like I said, this book is pretty fucking bleak. I will say too that for whatever reason, I guess just because of where they could afford to shoot it or whatever, the book actually takes place in Ohio, and the movie I think takes place in Minnesota. But like I said, it doesn't really make any difference to the story, so I'm assuming they just did that for budgetary reasons or whatever, wherever they were going to shoot it. So what we have here, the story is told from the first-person perspective of a guy named Hank Mitchell. And he's an accountant. He's 30 or in his early 30s. He has a wife named Sarah, who is a librarian, and she's also 8 months pregnant, at the beginning of the book. Now, the couple aren't wealthy, and they're not even really upper middle class or anything like that. But they do both have college degrees. They both have stable jobs. They have a pretty good handle on their finances. They have quite a bit of money in savings. And they have kind of a nice sort of starter home, in a decent suburb. Now, it turns out that they kind of ended up back in this small town, Ohio, where where Hank was from originally, due to kind of unforeseen circumstances or like money issues and something like that. It wasn't really what they wanted. Like they didn't really want to come back here, but they figure, oh, we'll come back here, have a starter home, save up some more money in a couple of years, and then we'll be able to kind of, I mean, they're pretty confident that they'll be able to move up to something bigger and better, like move to an actual city like one of these days or something like that. So they see this as like a temporary setback, I guess. Now, Hank also has an older brother, I believe he's 4 years older, whose name is Jacob. And Jacob is pretty much exactly the opposite of Hank. He's very obese, he's very unkempt, he's unemployed and doesn't really seem to be looking for a job or anything. He's not stupid. I think in the movie, if I remember correctly, it's been a while since I've seen the movie, but I think Billy Bob Thornton plays that character, and I think he plays him as like a little bit mentally challenged. He's absolutely not in the book. In the book, he's intelligent. He's just kind of like, I don't know. He's kind of like sort of like a big slob who doesn't really have any ambition in life. Mainly his big ambition is like going hunting and like hanging out with his friend Lou, and they just drink together. And Lou is a little bit of like a lowlife as well. Like they're kind of peas in a pod. Now, Hank and Jacob, the Mitchell brothers, they're not exactly estranged, but they really don't have all that much in common, so they don't really like talk that much, even though now they live in the same town. Now, 2 years prior to the events of the novel, Hank and Jacob's parents were killed in this really horrific car crash. Essentially, they drove like the wrong way, like up an exit ramp, and ended up getting hit head on by a semi. So yeah, they're super dead. Now, for a long time, like Hank had always thought this was an accident, like, oh, maybe they had drunk too much and weren't really paying attention. But it kind of comes to light later on that it's possible that it might have been, like, they might have done it on purpose. Like, it might have been suicide. And that might have been brought on by the fact that the parents were in, like, a huge amount of debt and were going to lose their farm. And indeed, they did end up, like, after they died, like, the farm ended up having to be sold, and the house that they grew up in, like that the kids grew up in, like was razed to the ground, and the land was sold. Even though Hank was never really all that close to his parents, because like I said, he was kind of like, I don't want to be a farmer, I don't want to live in this small town my whole life. So he like went off to college and then ended up having to come back, but he wanted to get the fuck out of there as quickly as possible. But he did kind of vow to uphold this one sort of peculiar, I guess it's not that peculiar, but a little bit of a peculiar like condition that was in his dad's will. That condition being once a year, at least once a year, I want my two sons, Hank and Jacob, to come together to the cemetery and visit, the parents' graves. So at the beginning of the novel, it's New Year's Eve, and Hank and Jacob are on the way to the cemetery to do this thing that they have started. It's going to be like a yearly tradition. Now, Lou, the lowlife friend of Jacob, is also with them because, because Jacob and Lou were like hanging out, and they're like, okay, well, your house is on the way to the cemetery, so we'll drop you off on the way. Also along for the ride is Mary Beth. Now, Mary Beth is a male dog who belongs to Jacob. They explain why he named the male dog Mary Beth, like later on, sort of. But yeah, it doesn't really matter all that much. Now, this dog actually ends up being essentially the first link in this chain of just steadily escalating chaos that will sort of like eventually doom the brothers and many, many people that are associated with them. So while they're on their way to the cemetery, along a sort of snowy road, because it's winter and it's Ohio, so everything's like covered with snow. So along this road near a nature preserve, a fox sort of like darts out in front of the truck. So whoever's driving, I can't remember who was driving, but they had to like hit the brakes really hard to avoid hitting the fox. Now the dog, Mary Beth, sees the fox and is like, woohoo, and like jumps out of the truck and like runs into the nature preserve after the fox. So then the three guys are just kind of like, well, fuck me. Now we have to go and like get the dog out of the woods because they can hear the dog like barking like out in the woods, and we can't leave him rather. Like I said, I kept wanting to say like her because the dog's name is Mary Beth, but yeah. So while they're looking for the dog, they find there, lying in the snow, is the wreckage of a small airplane. Now, they're kind of like, well, we should probably like call the police and report this because we're pretty sure somebody's dead in there. You know, that's usually what happens. And the two guys, like Jacob and Lou, who are, like I said, they're kind of like best friends and they're sort of like unemployed drunkie buddies. And they think that Hank is, you know, he's kind of like, you know, college boy. Oh, you think you're better than us, blah, blah, blah. So they're always kind of like conspiring and like making fun of him and like, you know, kind of essentially saying that he's like soft because he's like a city boy and all this other kind of stuff. So it's that kind of whole dynamic. So they're basically like, well, we think that you should go inside, like poke around inside the plane and see what the fuck is going on in there. And he's like, I don't really see why I should need to do that. And they're like, no, you totally should. So pretty much because he doesn't want them like picking on him anymore about like being a weenie, he decides to start poking around inside this plane. While he's in there, not only does he find the dead pilot, whose eyes have been pecked out by crows quite gruesomely, but he also finds a duffel bag containing $4.4 million. Now, at first, Hank, who is, you know, quite responsible, you know, he's just like a regular guy. He's got a mortgage and he's got a job and everything like that. He's like, look, we have to do the right thing and turn the money into the authorities. Nobody just loses $4.4 million. Obviously, somebody's looking for this, and it's too dangerous for us to keep it, no matter where it came from. It's like it could be from a drug deal, and the criminals will come looking for us. It could be any number of things. It's like we just shouldn't keep it because it's too dangerous. Now, Jacob and Lou, though, neither of whom have jobs, and Lou, who has like substantial gambling debts, are all in favor of keeping the money. Now, Hank at first is like trying to argue with them and like trying to stand his ground about it. But really, as it goes on, he sort of feels his conviction wavering at the thought of all that money. And it doesn't really take too much more argument before he agrees, okay, we will keep the cash. But I have a few conditions that hopefully will ensure that we don't get caught for essentially stealing whoever's money this is. Like I said, they don't have any idea. So first, he tells Jacob and Lou, I'm going to hang on to the money myself. He's like, I'm the most stable. And he correctly points out that Jacob and Lou are both drunks and are way more desperate for money than he is. He's not rich, like I said, but he's doing okay. So he's like, because I'm not as desperate as you guys, I'd be less likely to like dip into it or to do something dumb. Hank says, I'll hide it for the time being. He also insists we're not going to tell anybody about this cash. Jacob is single and doesn't have anybody to tell, but Lou has a girlfriend that he lives with named Nancy. Now, Hank promises that he won't even tell his own wife, Sarah, about it, which, spoiler alert, a promise that he breaks almost immediately, like as soon as he gets home, but that's neither here nor there. His second condition, no one is to touch or spend a single fucking dime of this money for 6 months, or at least until after the spring thaw, when the plane is eventually found. Because they said as soon as there's a thaw, someone's going to find it, because it's not like it's super hidden or anything. It's pretty much out in the open, like on this nature preserve. If the plane is found and they don't hear anybody talking about any missing money or anything like that, he's like, we can assume the money is safe because no one's looking for it, and then we can divide it up. His third condition, once the money is divided up, everybody has to quietly and separately leave town and not tell anybody where they're going. Now, this is the simple plan that they have all agreed to, and they do all agree to this because Hank's basically like, if you don't agree to these conditions, then I'm either going to call the cops right now and turn the money in, or I'm going to take it and I'm going to fucking burn it. So, you know what I mean? So they're basically like, okay, fine, we'll do that. He's like, all you got to do is wait 6 months, and if nothing, if nobody comes looking for the money, then it's free and clear, and we'll divide it up, and then we don't have to see each other anymore. So had everybody adhered to these simple rules, maybe none of the epic clusterfuck that happens after this would have happened. But it's a shame. Obviously, that's not how the shit goes. Because humans are, as we all know, imperfect creatures. And in the case of the characters in this particular novel, they're also greedy, reckless, careless, sometimes stupid, and in the end, downright evil. Turns out that $4 million is quite sufficient to transform even the most normal of all people into a complete psychopath. And boy, howdy, does that happen here in motherfucking spades. The thing about it, though, is that because of Scott Smith's prose, which is very... I don't want to say it's like unadorned. It is actually quite atmospheric, but it's very gripping. It's very visceral. And his pacing is very, very tightly controlled. So everything is just like this slow drip of like steadily ratcheting like shittery. And you're just kind of like, oh shit, like how much worse can this? Just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. And it's fucking crazy. So every step of this descent into utter madness that ensues is completely believable, and sometimes it even seems as though it's inevitable. And that's kind of something that he goes into, because this is all told from like Hank's perspective, like his first person point of view, so you know what he's thinking. And it's almost kind of, he makes it seem as though every single link in the chain, everything that happened and like, you know, kind of pushed him to all of these things that he got pushed to were almost like out of his control or inevitable, like fated. So that kind of goes into like a lot of the, you know, there's a lot of that kind of stuff going on as well. Now, and it's interesting too, because everything is from Hank's point of view, who went at the start is just like a regular family man. He's got a wife, he's got a kid on the way, he's got a job. He just seems like a nice dude. Everybody likes him. He's no different from anybody else that you know. So because of that, like, the story gets more and more horrifying as it goes on, because the guy is able to pretty much justify every new atrocity that he goes to by essentially portraying himself as a victim of circumstance. Like, well, this happened, which wasn't my fault, so that pushed me into this thing that I had to do, so I didn't have a choice. You know what I mean? Like, it's almost kind of like, well, everything conspired to like take away his freedom of action. So, and you almost kind of like buy it for a while, because in a way, the reader, like when you're reading it, you almost become like complicit in this sort of like ratcheting savagery, because up to a point, like after the point of no return, you're kind of low-key rooting for Hank to like sort of do whatever he needs to do to like keep the money. Like, you're almost kind of like disappointed, like with Bad Chef, like, oh no, he's not going to get to keep the $4 billion now. And then you're kind of like realizing, holy shit, I'm like complicit in this, because he's obviously doing like more and more like monstrous things. And not just him, like some of the other ones do it too, but it's mostly like him doing this stuff. So that's kind of like the genius of this book. And it really makes you think, because even you think, like, you as a reader, what if I was in this situation? Like, what if I found a plane, or what if I found like $4 million just like laying around, and we didn't really know who it was from and everything like that? You know, you can say all day long, well, I wouldn't have made the choices that the characters in this book made. But I'm assuming that most of you out there have not found just $4 million just like laying around in the snow, like ripe for the taking. I certainly haven't. So I think until you're in that situation, with circumstances being what they are, I don't think that you can actually predict like what you would do. And I think that's what's really fascinating about this, is that Hank, the character, who is a, you know, perfectly likable, like I said, a very normal, just generic kind of dude at the beginning, and by the end of this book, he is essentially a monster, but he can justify every single step, like it was beyond his control. And it's really scary, because it's almost kind of like, you know, it's almost kind of like a character study of, you know, what Hannah Arendt called the banality of evil, you know what I mean? Where it's just this step-by-step progression of how just like a regular Joe can end up becoming a monster, and he just excuses every single thing that he does as being beyond his control. Well, I was pushed into this, circumstance pushed me into this, I had to do it for the outcome that I wanted. Like, he almost kind of says that, you know, he didn't have a choice at certain points, like once everything had gone. And like I said, he kind of like goes back over it in his head sometimes, like literally, like saying, well, because this happened, I had to do this, and because of that, I had to do this. And then you just see every single link in the chain, and he almost like still thinks of himself as a good person, even as the murders start to like rack up, you know what I mean? So it's really terrifying. Like, it's a terrifying like psychological study of how that could happen, and it's completely and totally believable. Like I said, yeah, maybe some of the choices that he made and some of the other characters that made were dumb, but that's kind of the point, is like that characters would make dumb choices. If you had like $4 million, it was just laying there, and you were just kind of like, I mean, most people would probably be tempted, you know, to do like terrible things to keep hold of it. And Scott Smith knows that apparently, and is kind of like using that to sort of like, you know, terrify you like that. So yeah, it's just, this book is just stunningly bleak. So I have to say, if you're real into like thrillers that are just like super grim and like black-hearted, this is a really good one. It'll have you like glued to the edge of your seat the entire time, and it's just like this really horrific kind of deep dive into the psychology of someone going from normalcy to like complete depravity, and having a reason for doing every single thing, like just as his actions get worse and worse. So, I mean, if you're into thrillers at all, you really have to read this. It's one of the best thrillers that I've ever read in my whole entire life. I mean, it just kind of like, I was just like at the edge of my seat, like I said, the whole entire time. I was just like, holy shit, like how much worse can this get? Because you know that like bad shit's gonna happen. You know that like people are gonna get killed, and it's just like terrifying, like how bad this shit gets. And the fact that it's from the guy's point of view who's doing most of the bad shit, and his thought processes is just like chilling. But yeah, I mean, I was really into this. The movie's good too, but like I said, if you've seen the movie but it was a long time ago and you don't really remember exactly what happened, the movie is very similar, at least up until the end. But I mean, if you've seen the movie, maybe wait a little while, like before you read the book, until you kind of like forget some of the plot points, because I think it's better not knowing like all the twists and turns of the plot. And like, now, because like I said, you know that everything's going to go to shit. You know it's going to get bad, because that's what would happen. Like if men with this dynamic, if people with this dynamic found $4 million and had like all these conditions, you know that shit's going to go sideways, and it absolutely does. But yeah, this was a great fucking tense ass thriller. Easily one of my favorite thrillers of all time. And let me know if you've read it or if you've seen the movie or anything like that, what you thought about it. You know, just have a discussion about it down in the comments. And that will do it for this Tomes of Terror. I will see you guys on the next one. Bye.